Arabella stood at the threshold of the cathedral's grand doors, her heart hammering beneath the silken gown she could never afford. Across the aisle, Theodore Hawthorne, billionaire, tycoon, enigma, watched her with an inscrutable gaze. Moments ago, he had insisted she sign a strict non-disclosure agreement, sealing her lips in legal silence. Now, in front of the assembled elite, her palms trembled as the choir's voices swelled. Secrets threatened to spill with every measured step. She had crafted a lie so perfect no one suspected the truth. But when their vows were spoken, her world and his would shatter in the same breath. The late afternoon sun slanted through the salon's arched windows, casting amber patterns on the marble floor. Arabella tucked a loose curl behind her ear, surveying the room with a tight smile. Portraits of Hawthorne ancestors glared down from gilded frames. Every eye felt like an accusation. Across a long mahogany table sat Theodore's family, his impeccably groomed sister Claudine, their formidable mother Maribel, and a bevy of society matrons whose judgment, Arabella knew, was far harsher than any courtroom. Maribel Hawthorne adjusted her pearls with a brittle click. "You realize, dear," she began in a cool soprano, "that this union is as much a merger of legacies as an engagement of hearts." Her gaze flicked to Arabella's simple ring, finger, the diamond modest compared to the family heirloom she wore on her own hand. "We expect you to uphold certain standards." Arabella's pulse thudded. She had anticipated disapproval, anticipated this room might feel like a tribunal, but her throat closed at the implication. "Of course, Mrs. Hawthorne." She forced the words out evenly. "I'll do my best." Claudine leaned forward, lips curling. "Your best? A play actress from a third-tier troupe isn't exactly the social equal of the Hawthornes. Are you prepared for our world?" Her voice was silk-laced with poison. A hush fell. Theodore, at the head of the table, looked away, fingering the stem of his water glass. Arabella's stomach churned. She imagined all the whispers already circulating. What scandal lurks behind that NDA he forced her to sign? Inwardly, she willed her cheeks not to burn. "You belong here." She repeated it like a mantra, though every fiber rebelled. "You belong here." This was her moment, her triumph over a past she'd spent years hiding. Yet the more she tried to convince herself, the louder the doubt roared in her mind. "You don't belong. Your hands aren't accustomed to marble tables. Your voice doesn't carry the pedigree of Hawthorne blood." Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed. "We have one condition. Complete discretion. No rumors, no leaked photographs, no unauthorized interviews." She tapped the polished table. "You already signed the non-disclosure. We trust you understand why." Arabella's heart twisted. The papers sat in her purse, binding her to silence about the truth of who she really was, about the life she'd fled, the name she'd abandoned. She felt as though she'd surrendered pieces of herself with each signature. And yet, in a way, this secrecy was her salvation. If the Hawthornes never discovered her real lineage, she might survive this world of gilded cages. An attendant brought afternoon tea, and Claudine took a delicate sip, deliberate as a serpent. "I do hope, Arabella, that you know how easily reputations can be shattered." Her tone was gentle, but Arabella heard the guillotine's blade. She raised her teacup with a steady hand. "I understand." But inside, her mind raced. Reputation, secrets, NDA, marriage. The words felt like shackles. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, picturing the man who had proposed to her, Theodore. When he knelt by the Seine, the candlelight flickering on the river, she had seen something vulnerable in his gold-edged mask of confidence, a yearning for authenticity, perhaps even for adventure. He didn't ask her name, he asked her soul. Maybe he thought he'd found the freedom he'd always craved in her. Now, seated across from him, she wasn't sure which was more terrifying. his disappointment if he learned her truth, or the weight of sustaining this lie forever. A soft chime announced another guest. Claudine's lips tightened. She exchanged a glance with Mrs. Hawthorne. A doorway opened, revealing Theodore's old friend and business partner, Victor Klein. Tall, dark-haired, with eyes that missed nothing. He offered Arabella a courteous bow before settling at a spare seat. Theodore exhaled, an easing of tension that Arabella recognized as relief. Victor's presence injected a new dynamic. "I've heard you're quite the thespian," he said, casually addressing Arabella. "Our dear Theodore seems enchanted by your performance talents." Claudine smirked, and Arabella bristled. "Performance is just part of my history," she replied, striving to sound composed. "But I trust I'm here to create a future with Theodore." Victor's gaze was thoughtful. "Yes, but don't let politics and pedigree stifle your spirit. Hawthorne Enterprises didn't build its reputation by play it safe." His glance toward Theodore was kindly, but cautionary. Mrs. Hawthorne's lips pursed. "We appreciate your sentiment, Victor, but discretion remains paramount." The afternoon wore on with polite interrogation, opinions on charity initiatives, preferred summer retreats, the management style Arabella intended to bring to the foundation she and Theodore would co-chair. Each question felt like another test, another trap. And every time Arabella answered, her heart sank a little more under the burden of her concealed past. Once the last question was posed, Mrs. Hawthorne rose and signaled that the meeting was over. Arabella exhaled for the first time in hours, her shoulders slumping. Theodore stood and extended a hand. "Thank you," he murmured, voice low enough that only she could hear. "You handled that admirably." Relief washed through her, and guilt. She managed a small smile and allowed him to guide her toward the grand staircase. As they ascended, Theodore's hand lingered near hers, a silent promise of solidarity, yet his eyes were distant. Arabella longed to trust that look, but found herself questioning whether he saw her, or the façade she'd so carefully built. At the top of the stairs, Theodore paused and turned. "You know you're safe with me, right?" Arabella's throat tightened. "I know." He searched her face as if seeking confirmation. "No one else matters." "But someone does." The thought stabbed at Arabella's ribs. The shadow of her former life, the name she'd shed, the people she'd abandoned loomed behind every polished smile. She sank into a chair in the gallery beyond the staircase landing, surrounded by silent sculptures that seemed to judge her more kindly than the living. In the hush, she let her mask slip for a moment, allowing her guard to crack. "What have I done?" she wondered. "Bound by an NDA to a man I barely know, with a family that despises me. How long can I pretend?" Her reflection in the glass was almost unrecognizable. A poised fiancé in designer silks, but a soul trembling beneath. She steeled herself, recalling why she'd agreed to this madness in the first place. Not for money, not for status, but for a chance to start anew. To redefine herself beyond her past. A faint click behind her made Arabella whirl. Theodore stood framed in the doorway, concern in his eyes. "Arabella?" She inhaled deeply, smoothing her skirts. "I'm fine," she said, voice firmer than she felt. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Whatever lies they threw at you today, they don't define you. And if you ever want to tell me the rest, beyond that NDA, I'll listen." Her heart stumbled at the offer of understanding, yet the weight of her secret pressed down more heavily than ever. She nodded, though uncertainty fluttered through her chest. "When the time is right," she whispered. He obliged her with a warm, lingering look. "Whenever you're ready." As Theodore left, Arabella sank back into the chair, determination and dread coiling within her. The first battle had been waged, and she'd survived. But the war against her past, against the Hawthorne family's suspicions, against the truth waiting to burst through her carefully constructed world, had only just begun. Arabella awoke, the next morning, to the muted chime of her phone, heart fluttering as she read Theodore's message. Charity luncheon at the Montclair estate. Your presence is requested at noon. The Montclair estate. A sprawling manor where every guest was more invested in social standing than in any cause. She dressed in pale blue silk, rehearsing polite smiles and rehearsing answers to the inevitable question, "Why are you here?" When she arrived, Claudine hovered by the buffet, offering platitudes that stung like ice. "We do hope you'll donate generously," she purred, watching Arabella's expression for any hint of weakness. Each time Arabella met her gaze, she felt Claudine's judgment like a spotlight. Yet beneath that pressure, a quiet resolve gathered strength. "I belong here," she repeated, channeling the steadiness she'd shown Theodore the day before. Over cucumber sandwiches and iced tea, Victor Klein intercepted her with genuine warmth. "You've got a sharp mind for philanthropy," he said, nodding toward her notes on the luncheon's agenda. "Your ideas on youth arts programs, brilliant." His encouragement was unexpected, and Arabella felt a flicker of confidence. Maybe she could reshape this world, rather than merely endure it. She voiced a proposal to allocate funds to underprivileged theater groups, earning polite applause. In that moment, she sensed a shift. Her voice had weight. But Claudine was quick to undercut her. "How quaint. Perhaps we should also fund basic math tutoring, if we're truly concerned with education." The barbed comment landed with a collective titter. Arabella's cheeks flamed, and she forced a laugh. Internally, doubt gnawed. "Is my vision too naive?" She paused, then offered a composed reply. "Absolutely. Math is vital. I imagine a program that blends analytical skills with creative expression might keep more kids engaged." The retort was measured, but inside her heart thundered with triumph. She'd stood her ground. After the luncheon, Theodore intercepted Arabella in the rose garden. His brows were drawn, concern shading his features. "I heard Claudine's comment. She can be cruel." He brushed a stray petal from her sleeve. "I'm sorry you had to endure that." Arabella looked at him, seeing earnest empathy in his eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge how much his approval meant. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's easier facing them when you're here." His hand closed over hers, grounding her in a calm certainty she'd rarely felt. That evening, as they rehearsed their roles as an engaged couple at a family dinner, Maribel presented Arabella with a delicate brooch, a legacy piece. "It's yours now," she said, voice frosty. "Wear it tomorrow at the gala." Arabella accepted, though confusion prickled at her. Was this a genuine offering or another test? "If it's a trap, I'll still wear it," she vowed inwardly, fastening it to her gown with deliberate grace. At the spring gala the next night, the ballroom pulsed with glittering chandeliers and murmured intrigue. Arabella moved through clusters of investors and socialites, every eye a potential threat. She felt the weight of Maribel's brooch at her shoulder, its cold metal a reminder that her acceptance was still conditional. Claudine drifted behind her like a vulture, whispering critiques on her posture, her gown, even the way her hair caught the light. Each whisper tightened the knot in Arabella's chest. Yet when Theodore introduced her to a room full of future donors, speaking of her vision for community outreach, she saw genuine interest ignite. One elderly patron asked, "How do you plan to measure success?" And Arabella answered with clarity, outlining tangible milestones and impact studies. Applause rippled through the room. In that instant, the narrator sees her, not as a trembling outsider, but as a formidable partner. Claudine's lip curled, but Arabella met her sister-in-law's glare with unflinching composure. Later, As the gala wound down, Arabella slipped, away to the courtyard, the night air crisp and liberating. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the city lights twinkling behind her like distant stars. I am more than a façade. A soft click alerted her to Theodore's arrival. He knelt by her side and wrapped an arm around her waist. You were extraordinary tonight. She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his confidence folding around her own. For the first time, Arabella recognized the truth. The external pressures, the hawthorn barbs, the NDA, the perfumed world of privilege, could shape her, but they could not break her. Her secret lay hidden still, but with each challenge she grew stronger, more certain that when the time came to reveal her true identity, she would stand unafraid. The tension of the past days had forged her into someone new, someone ready to claim her place, not just in Theodore's world, but in her own. Arabella stood in the center of the grand rehearsal hall, its vaulted ceiling echoing the soft tinkle of crystal chandeliers. Candlelight flickered over the assembled family and friends, Theodore's kin arrayed on one side, her own few allies on the other. Tonight was meant to be a gentle preview of tomorrow's ceremony, but Arabella's blood ran hot with anxiety. Whispers had swirled that Maribel Hawthorne planned to announce a family emergency, canceling the wedding unless Arabella agreed to a new clause, one that would bind her not only in silence, but in servitude to the Hawthorne name. Maribel, reclining beside the long oak table, lifted a slender brow. "My dear," she drawled, voice as smooth as poisoned silk, "I regret to inform you that tomorrow's nuptials cannot proceed without your acquiescence to our final amendment." She slid a slim envelope toward Arabella. "Sign this, allowing me full editorial oversight of the foundation you and Theodore will helm. Otherwise, well, we simply must postpone." A hush fell. Theodore's jaw clenched, his dark eyes flashed. Arabella's heart thundered in her ears. Around her, the Hawthorne cousins exchanged smug glances, and Claudine's mocking smile spread like a kiss of betrayal across her features. Arabella picked up the envelope, fingers trembling. The paper inside would cement her role as puppet, erasing any hope she had of steering the foundation toward the communities she'd promised. Her throat tightened. Sign this, and, despite her growing confidence, she would forever remain under Maribel's thumb. She glanced at Theodore. His gaze was tortured, torn between love and the oppressive weight of his family's demands. He'd never hidden his devotion, but tonight the Hawthorne legacy pressed upon him like a vice. In that moment, Arabella felt every ounce of her rehearsed calm shatter. The fragile anchor of her confidence splintered, but from the shards, a fiercer resolve emerged. She set the envelope down with deliberate care and rose to her full height. Maribel's lips curled in anticipation of Arabella's capitulation. "Surely you understand the importance of this arrangement," she purred. Arabella inhaled, drawing strength from every trial she'd endured. Claudine's taunts at the Montclair luncheon, the brittle barbs during the gala, the relentless anxiety of living under that NDA. She felt the weight of her secret identity, the name she'd shed, stir behind her ribs. No longer a burden, but a source of power. "With all due respect," Arabella said, her voice clear and unwavering, "I cannot sign." Murmurs rippled through the room. She squared her shoulders. "I came into this marriage to build something genuine, not to be your silent instrument." Every word rang out, echoing in the hushed hall. "If the Hawthorne legacy demands I sacrifice my integrity, my vision, then I choose myself." Maribel's eyes narrowed into slits. She leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "You'll ruin everything. Do you truly believe Theodore will stand by you when you defy his family?" Arabella felt a sting of doubt, but it was fleeting. She met Maribel's gaze head-on. "Ask him." She turned toward Theodore, voice soft but resolute. "Theodore, is this what you want? A wife who bows to your mother's whims, or a partner who stands beside you, equal in purpose and in name?" A tension crackled between them. Theodore rose slowly, reverent light dancing in his eyes as he crossed the floor. He took Arabella's hand and faced his mother. "Mom," he said, measured but firm, "I will not marry someone who fears her own partner's family, and I will not ask Arabella to sign away her autonomy." A light flickered in his expression. Pride. Maribel's composure faltered. The hush deepened, punctuated only by the clap of his words. She looked from Theodore to Arabella, realization dawning that her iron grip had slipped. Claudine gasped, rising to her feet. "You can't bring shame on this family at the altar," she hissed. Arabella inhaled again, letting the courage swell. "The only shame would be marrying under conditions that violate my principles. If you cannot respect my voice, then this union is meaningless." A murmur of approval stirred among the guests. Victor Klein stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on Theodore's shoulder. "Well said," he murmured, nodding at Arabella. "A true partnership demands respect." Maribel's façade cracked. She closed her eyes for a moment, then exhaled in a measured sigh. "So be it," she said, voice hollow. "Tomorrow's wedding will proceed without that clause." She collected the envelope and swept from the hall, leaving silence in her wake. Arabella exhaled the breath she'd been holding for hours. Theodore closed the small gap between them, wiping a strand of hair from her face. "You were magnificent," he whispered. Her chest rose and fell, tension melting into warmth. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, eyes shining. He pressed his lips to her forehead. "Always," he promised. As they stood, amid the emptied hall, Arabella felt the final threads of her old self unravel. She had faced the Hawthorne legacy and herself, and emerged unbroken. Tomorrow, she would walk down the aisle, not as a frightened potential, but as an equal partner, her secret still hers alone, her voice finally free. Arabella awoke on the morning of her wedding, with the sunlight filtering pale gold through the linen drapes. The tension that had coiled in her chest just 24 hours before felt loosened, as though the climactic confrontation with Maribel had exorcised the last vestiges of her doubt. She sat on the edge of the bed in the bridal. Sweet, the white silk gown she'd chosen yesterday spread around her like a promise. A soft knock announced her maid of honor, Elise, Arabella's oldest friend from her acting troupe days. Elise swept into the room carrying a tray of tea and pastries. "You look radiant," she said, slipping behind Arabella to tie the delicate lace at the back of her dress. "I heard how you handled your final test. You were unstoppable." Arabella smiled, tracing the floral embroidery on the bodice. "It feels surreal," she admitted. "I hardly recognize that terrified woman who signed an NDA 2 weeks ago." She paused, letting the memory drift through her mind. The oppressive sitting room, the weight of the Hawthorne portraits, the moment she'd found her voice. "I'm proud of her, though." Elise reached forward and brushed a curl from Arabella's forehead. "And you should be. You stood up not only for yourself, but for the values you believe in." She hesitated, then met Arabella's eyes. "Whatever happens today, remember that." Later in the cathedral's hushed grandeur, Arabella felt a familiar flutter of nerves as guests took their seats. Theodore waited at the altar, his confident stance and steadying smile reassuring her. As the organ's chords rose, she took Elise's arm and walked down the aisle. Each step felt light. No longer did she feel the sting of judgment or the tremor of uncertainty. Instead, each footfall was a declaration. She belonged here by choice and by right. When she reached the altar, she placed her hand in Theodore's. He squeezed gently, eyes shining with pride. Behind him, Maribel sat with a neutral expression, No more tests, no more whispers of clauses. Arabella gave her a respectful nod, and Maribel inclined her head in acknowledgement. It was a small gesture, but in it, Arabella recognized a truce, earned. The ceremony proceeded with perfect grace. Vows were exchanged in measured tones, each word weighted with sincerity. When Arabella spoke, her voice was clear and unwavering. "I promise to stand by you not as a silent partner, but as an equal. I will speak truth when it matters, and I will listen when you need me. Together, we build not just a legacy of wealth, but a legacy of hope, compassion, and integrity." As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, applause filled the cavernous space. Theodore lifted Arabella's hand, and his smile was triumphant, a reflection of her own inner victory. At the reception in the Hawthorne family's glass conservatory, guests clustered around to offer congratulations. Investors praised the community foundation's ambitious early grants. Distant relatives murmured approval at Arabella's poise. Even Claudine offered a curt but sincere smile. Arabella moved among them with calm assurance, greeting each guest with gracious warmth. Every conversation underscored the transformation she'd undergone. From outsider bound by secrecy to respected, collaborator whose vision mattered. After the toasts, Arabella slipped away to the edge of the conservatory where a reflecting pool mirrored the star-flecked sky. Theodore found her there, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "How does it feel?" he asked softly. "Liberating," she said, resting her head against his chest. She thought of the NDA she carried in her purse, a relic of her fear. Today, it felt inert, powerless against the strength she'd claimed. "I feel free," she murmured. "Free to be myself." He kissed the top of her head. "I've never been more certain of anything." She lifted her gaze to meet his. "Thank you for believing in me." He laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You did all the work. I just got to stand beside you." Arabella closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his words and the soft chorus of the harpist drift through her. In that calm moment, she reflected on the arc of her journey. The frightened woman signing legal bonds she barely understood, the tentative volunteer at the luncheon, the trembling bride bracing for family judgment, and finally, the emboldened partner who spoke truth to power. Each step had been arduous, but now each wound had become a lesson in resilience. When the conservatory doors opened to reveal the first dance, Arabella took Theodore's hand and led him to the floor. As they moved to the soft waltz, she felt the world shift beneath their feet. No longer a gilded cage, but a stage upon which they would build a shared future. In the final strains of the music, Arabella's thoughts softened into gratitude. She had wrested her destiny from secrecy and expectation. She had not only survived the Hawthorne legacy, she had reshaped it. And as she looked into the man she loved, she knew their union would be forged by truth, respect, and unwavering partnership, proof that a single person's voice, once found, can change the course of everything. Arabella stood on the balcony of the newly opened Hawthorne Community Center, the spring air warm against her cheeks. Below, laughter drifted from the courtyard where children painted murals on freshly plastered walls. Her vision brought to life. She smoothed the hem of her tailored jacket and glanced at Theodore, who joined her quietly, his arm settling around her waist. "This," he began, nodding toward the vibrant scene below, "is all you." She smiled, the last traces of doubt slipping away. "We did this," she replied, voice steady. "Together." Arabella inhaled deeply, letting the moment settle around her. The woman who had signed an NDA in fear and worn borrowed confidence like armor was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that true strength came from honesty, compassion, and the courage to claim one's own story. A soft breeze stirred the blossoms at her feet, and she reached out to touch one, marveling at its delicate resilience. She had faced judgment, hidden her past, and confronted a legacy built on privilege. But she'd emerged empowered, her integrity intact. Turning back to Theodore, she squeezed his hand. "I'm ready," she whispered. Not just for what lay ahead, but for every truth she would share, every challenge she would meet, and every promise she would keep, first to herself, then to the world she'd helped transform.